We got there, but we got there. You know what I'm saying? But we got a guest.
Yes, we do. Welcome, Erica Hanson, to the Ride Along Friday Night Smoke Session.
So great to be here.
So we're gonna give you a little introduction. She is the TV producer, Emmy nominated, Emmy award winning.
I'm nominated.
Nominated,
Twice.
yes, twice, which is
But
amazing.
not winning yet.
She is behind Rough Riders Chronicles, Death Row Chronicles, Behind the Music, Reboot.
Yeah.
A lot of other shows that you've seen on Food Network. What was it? DC Cupcakes, Kitchen Nightmares, Undercover Boss, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So welcome, Erica Hanson,
It's
to
awesome
the
to
Red
be here, especially in such a historic place, Powerhouse Studios,
You're in the
where
pit.
it all began. I can't believe I'm in the pit.
You're in the pit, Erica.
It's pretty amazing. Rough Riders Chronicles, honestly, it means so much to me to be here because I've been blessed to produce many different kinds of shows, and Rough Riders Chronicles was truly one of the most extraordinary experiences I've had personally and professionally, and to be able to, to have the opportunity to tell that story and to meet, and spend time with Wa and Dee and the Rough Riders family and the artist. It was extraordinary. It's quite a story.
So let's go back, let's start a little bit from the beginning of who Erica Hanson is. And how did you're a TV producer, television producer, and how did you get into that? Like, how did that start to where you are now?
That's such a great question. Well, growing up, we weren't allowed to watch TV. My mom was a teacher, and there are 5 kids, and she was very strict about television. You had to read, or go out and play, but no TV. But so I didn't want to watch a lot of TV growing up, and my father was in the Navy, so we moved all over the world. Almost every year, I lived in a different city.
Oh, wow.
We lived in Japan, Taiwan. I lived in Brazil. We just were always moving for his job.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I mention that is I think in many ways it's why I do what I do. Because growing up, you're always the new kid in school. I went to a Brazilian school, and there were no other Americans there, and I didn't speak Portuguese. So you observed, and you learned quickly what that world was all about. And then by the time you became a part of that world, you had to leave. And in many ways, when I produce a story, for example, Rough Riders, I did that for a year, and I was so embraced and part of the family to tell that story, and then you move on. And it's, so I think a lot of those skill sets of observing and telling a story, but I got into television because I was in college and I studied liberal arts, and my father was in the Navy, and he had just retired early, and he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do next. He had and he was at CNN doing on-air commentary on military issues. And so he said to me, I was waitressing that summer to make money, and he said, "You should come down and see what I do." So I went to CNN in DC, where we lived, and I found it fascinating. And I was and I applied for an internship, and it all sort of started in that that excitement about a story that you just are constantly learning. That being able to be exposed to a world you didn't know, or a story you had no idea, and I found that really fascinating. So I interned at CNN, and then started working in DC as a researcher and that led to working at the Olympics, because I speak Portuguese and Spanish, so I ended up working for ABC at the Olympics, and that led to coming to New York, and I worked for TV Globo, Brazil's big television network, and telling stories for TV Globo, because I speak Portuguese, so I learned a lot about producing with TV Globo in New York, and so I've always been freelance, and so always seeing what's out there, what would be an interesting story to tell.
So, for people that don't know, what exactly is a television producer?
Oh, that's a great question. So traditionally, what a producer does, or what I do, whether I'm a producer is someone who comes up with a creative vision for how you're going to tell the story.
Okay.
Then working with a team to figure out how you're going to shoot it. Who do you need to interview? So for Rough Riders, I didn't know a lot about Rough Riders before I started. So it was figuring out, okay, who are we going to interview? We interviewed more than 60 people for Rough Riders.
Yeah, you did.
And then doing the research, how are we going to tell that story? And then figuring out, who you're going to interview, what are you going to shoot to help tell the story. Then it's then writing the story, and then doing the interviews, writing the story, and then overseeing the edit. So, to really see it all the way through, that's sort of from the beginning to end. But it's a village. It takes a team. So there's a lot of people that support, support that process.
Interesting. So, the people. So, when you're looking at a story, like you said, for instance, you did the Death Row Chronicles.
That I oversaw the edit of that. So
what makes you pick that type of script or that type of story? Like, what made you go to that? Because you also were talking about behind the music. You're working with the reboot of that's coming out.
Yeah.
So what got you into telling those stories of music?
Music. Well, it's interesting. Behind the Music started in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And it was such a great concept because it was taking an in-depth look on a great artist. And when you think about it, anyone who's an artist that has achieved so much, they usually have a pretty fascinating story. What shaped them? What were their influences? I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to do Bob Marley's Behind the Music. He had passed away. That was my first documentary. And at that point, but I spent so much time with the Marley families. I took his mother Booker, to 9 Mile, where he was from, a little village in the countryside in Jamaica. I went to Trenchtown, a very tough part of town where he grew up. I took his mother there, and it's when you start to look at what were the things that influenced him, what were his what shaped him. His father was white, his mother was black, his father wasn't a part of his life. The influence of the music at that time, all those things. What drives him? What was it that drove him? And I think music, what I love about music is that it adds a whole other layer of telling that artist's story. So that like DMX for Rough Riders, I was so fortunate to have the opportunity to spend probably 6 hours with him over 2 evenings to really listen to his story and talk to him about his music. And when you use music as a device for storytelling, it adds a whole other dimension. Sure. You think of slipping, and as he said, my music is my life. It tells my story. So if you can use that as a layer of storytelling so that you don't have to write something or hear something, it adds a whole other dimension to the story. So I think I really was drawn to be able to use music in storytelling.
So what drew you to Rough Riders? How did you say, okay, I'm going to do, like I said, you did Death Row, and what made you go to Rough Riders?
Well, it's interesting. The company that I work for doing Rough Riders, their name is Creature Films, and they have a part of E1. And I have known the founders of that company for many years. We all did Behind the Music together. And so they know that I'm also very drawn to emotional storytelling and transformative storytelling, and really and love working with music. So they, I had through them, Death Row Chronicles was an opportunity, and that's a pretty fascinating story.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I had a great experience doing that, and then that led them to say, we'd love for you to do Rough Riders. And I knew a bit about Rough Riders, but not. That's a 5-part documentary series, so it's pretty in depth. And I think when I think of why that story I was so drawn to, after spending time with Wah and Dee and the Deans, just think about that. The themes of family, of struggle, of survival, of music, of being that entrepreneurial. What it took for Wah and Dee to get off the streets with Siobhan and then move into music. How they did that, what drove them, that work ethic. It really struck me that Wah and Dee said they ran Powerhouse like they ran the block. It was 24/7. So that work ethic, of just never stopping. Swizz said he had a blister on his shoulder from sleeping on the floor. He just never left.
No, yeah, that's true. Right here,
yeah, which
where
is
you
so much history. And so I just. And I found the story incredibly inspiring, and then the music and the impact of the music, on so many different levels. So it was a story, and I think one of the things that I loved about Rough Riders is really finding that emotional component to the story. DMX, I've interviewed many people in my life, and that had to be one of the most moving experiences I think I've ever had.
And I was going to ask you that. What was the most... Yeah.
He, I think because he was so... I don't think I've ever met anybody who was so honest and so real in what he was saying and didn't hide anything, and so vulnerable and open to when he remembered his mother kind of abandoning him at a children's village, a home for troubled kids.
I used to work there.
He used to work there. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
He started to cry.
Yeah.
It just was overwhelming for him to remember that moment. But at the same time, he could then switch and be so intense.
Yeah.
The energy of remembering him and Swizz getting into all sorts of trouble.
Right, exactly.
While they were making that first album. And so he, he was very, his intensity and his honesty, and I felt like I was on a journey talking to him.
Yeah. And I like the way you said that you guys told that story, because you didn't just have them sitting there interviewing and just telling a story. Like, you actually showed the story. Like, you had a character that played Wah, that played Dee, you played DMX and all, Swizz Speed, and you actually showed, picturing the story they're telling in the studio, in the cab, and all these different situations. I love how you told that story.
Oh,
and a lot of people were commenting on, social media as, because Rough Riders was, all of the members were watching it together. We were all watching it together,
Really?
kind of around the nation. Like, it went viral.
Oh, I love that.
Because we were all commenting and talking about it, and that exact scene that you're talking about, like, everybody in that moment was like, I'm in tears. Like, it was so moved. Everybody was so moved by his story that they, it was so relatable in what people have gone through. And like, our Westchester chapter has done community service at that home. So, we've dealt with the children there and things like that. So, like, just to, be a part of that and be able to hear his story and, hear his emotions and his feelings and his struggle, because that's why people took his death so hard, because, he's from this community, he's from Yonkers, and so people could just, the men and, the young men in the community just could relate to him, and, they grew up with him, and so it meant so much to all of us just to have him around, and then to lose him so early on, early in age, because 50's not that old. And then, to now just try to, like, pick up the pieces, because that was a major loss for everybody. But I'm so glad that story was told.
That, when you think about it, it was so fortunate that there was that window of time when we were able to do that. And even though as I mentioned, only spent, maybe a total of 10 hours with him in my life, he had a huge impact on me. And his being that honest about his struggle as a child and what he had to overcome and survive, I was deeply moved by that. and it made me, I get emotional thinking about myself. I even now feel emotional because I think about Eddie said it was a blessing. Through that curse of what he had to experience, it was a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was so inspired by that outlook and admired him.
And because of that story, he said he was able to reconcile with his mom and understand what she was going through in that time, why she had to make those decisions for him in his life. And you can tell, even as a grown man, it still hurt him. It still, touched him, in a way that, that probably could have never really been fixed, because he didn't understand at the time. So,
but there was one other story that really resonated with me, and he described a very difficult summer he had as a child, and he was in his room for days, and he looked at his zipper, and he said, but to pass the time, I would look at my zipper and I'd pretend it was a fire engine. And he said, I read every book in my room over and over and over. And he said, if I hadn't had that experience, it's where my imagination began. Mm-hmm. And his love of words. And even just a few weeks ago, I was up at Sedgwick for the event where Law was honored for his humanitarian
right,
work.
Yeah.
And his son, Exodus, who's 5, I took these pictures because he was writing the letters of the alphabet and words for an hour nonstop. And I kept thinking about what Earl said about his love of words.
Mm-hmm.
He loved words. And then here I am watching his son carefully write all these words. And he said his favorite letter is A. Though then he ran off and I couldn't ask him why.
So I kind of got a late question. You were talking about earlier about what drove these artists like Bob Marley and other people to do what they do. And I know you did mention that all it took was your dad was to bring you to CNN and for you to see what it was and for you to fall in love to do what you do. Once you know, but what really drove you specifically to really be like, okay, this is it? Because I'm sure that was that the only thing was you interested in at that time?
Yeah, I really didn't know what I wanted to do in college. I studied liberal arts like history and English, and I didn't know what kind of job. I had no idea. And when I went to that internship, and it sparked, I thought, wow, this is so interesting, because every story as an intern that I was assigned to a reporter to help do research or whatever they asked me to do, I was learning. Like every story was different, and I thought, wow, this is kind of cool that you can meet people from all these different worlds, all these different topics, and I'm learning every day. And as an intern, I made a lot of mistakes, because at CNN back then, the interns did everything, and so those when you see a reporter and they have the box, the little box next to the graphic box, I always would pan the camera the wrong way and cover the anchor's face up with the graphic box, and the director was so calm, he'd like, no, Erica, the other way. But so it was that being exposed to always learning, and then also I think as my career progressed, it really solidified. So I worked, when I moved to England, I worked in sports, and I found it fascinating for a year and a half to profile some of the iconic athletes in the world, current and former, and what drove them to truly be the very best in the world. And so I think I just found it so stimulating that I felt very alive, that I kept meeting people. I spent time with Vasily Alexeyev. He was a great weightlifter in Russia. I've just met so many people who do such different things, and what I think that inspired me, and it also inspired me, drove me. And actually, I said this to Wa when I first met him. I said, I have a huge moral responsibility to tell your story, and our team, to do it the right way, because it's your story. And so that drives me, because I want to tell your story the right way, because it's a big responsibility.
It's huge responsibility.
And that drives me. And that meant a lot to me with Rough Riders, because, you know, it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, besides Rough Riders, because I heard you emphasize on it, I'm sure every moment is fantastic and amazing. I can't even begin to imagine. What was one of the first big whoa moments for you that you realized that you was no longer just interning, that you're actually in this now?
Oh, I just had a memory. Just no one's ever asked me that. Just popped in my head right now. My very first shoot that I ever did by myself, without, you know, I think I was 26, and I was working in sports in London, and my boss said, "You're ready. You're going to go to Italy, and you're going to profile." His name's Reinhold Messner, and he was an extraordinary mountaineer. He climbed all the 8,000 meter peaks, the highest mountains in the world, without oxygen, and by himself and a Sherpa, like 2 of them. And usually you're on big expeditions. So he lives in a castle in northern Italy in these mountains, and I had never done a shoot by myself. And I wanted to get what we called B-roll, you know, things that help illustrate a person's story. So for Rough Riders, it was the motorcycle chapters, and Rough Riders for the Rescue. So for Reinhold Messner, he just started riding horses. I mean, and also I shot him climbing and with his kid just to show his life. And the horse spooked and ran, I've never seen this, ran like right into the side of like a cliff of a rock. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just did a shot with the greatest mountaineer of all time, and he may have broken his knee. But that shoot was like, and I remember calling my boss saying, oh my gosh, I may have just broken the kneecap of the greatest mountaineer in the world, and he can never climb again. But that shoot was such a huge responsibility. I really felt the responsibility of telling, you know, wow, this is up to me. You know, I've got to figure out what to ask him, what to shoot. It's my responsibility to figure out how to tell the story. And then I was very worried that I just ruined his career. But that was a really defining moment where I was like, I'm on my own, it's up to me, and I better get it right. And I made a mistake.
Now, when you say responsibility, do you sometimes equate that to pressure in a way?
Yeah, there is. That's, you know, in production, there can be a lot of pressure, you know, because there's pressure of meeting your deadlines, of staying on schedule, of booking all the interviews, there's a lot of pressure, you know, of hitting deadlines. You know, you're dealing with a lot of content, and you're overseeing a team that's it's a team, and how do you motivate bring the team together so that we all are telling the best story. And I think also on shoots, when you're in the field, it can get intense because there's a lot going on. But I have 2 friends who are former Navy SEALs, and they have some great phrases. Calm is contagious and panic is contagious. So I always try to remember that when I'm in the field and there's a lot going on. If I'm calm, everybody else will be calm. If I panic, then everybody else can panic, and that's not a good recipe for success.
No, it's not.
Panic.
Don't ever panic.
Don't panic. But it's hard. Sometimes in the field, you feel the pressure. You know, you got to get everything shot, and you feel that pressure.
Yeah, but I'm sure, like, that was just something I just wanted to know, but in all reality, I'm pretty sure all in all to you, that it's more of an excitement and an enjoyment for you.
Oh, I love it.
More than anything else.
Yeah,
I can only imagine. Because that's something that's just like, it's like a 2-for-1. Like, you know, you're doing something that you love first and foremost, because nobody wants to be doing anything that they don't want to do, regardless of who they meet. But then that's the cherry on top for you. You get to actually meet a lot of these people, and then on top of that, be the one responsible for getting the story out correct the way you do it. So,
that's a great way to put it. And you know what? My parents always encourage that to really pursue what you love, and then that's the most important thing. And to then make a living doing something that you love if you can. And I feel very fortunate that I really do love what I do, even though it's a lot of work. But it doesn't really feel like work because I really
You're
love,
enjoying
love
it. Yeah,
doing
you're
it.
enjoying it.
You
Yeah.
know, I love doing it.
I'm sure that if you didn't love it as much as you do, would you really, would you have toughened it up and been like, oh, I'm about to get to meet this person and that person, or would you just would have found something that you love doing?
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, you know, there are moments where I can feel, like, to be honest, before interviewing DMX, I was a little nervous.
You didn't know what to expect?
You know, I didn't know what to expect. What he like, you know, I had heard that he, you know, didn't really enjoy doing, I really tried to make it a conversation versus like an interview. And, but I was, you know, because you want to do a great job, right? And I want him to enjoy the experience and have a good conversation. And it really was, it turned out, it was an amazing experience. But there are moments where, you think, oh gosh, can I do this? Can I really do a great job? But I think that also, that adrenaline is a good thing sometimes, right? Because it lifts you.
The thing about X is that he was only like that with people that he had to be like that with. You know, he recognized that you was wholesome as he was, so of course it was no reason for him to. You know, but even though that's still like, you know, like a great thing to even be, because I'm pretty sure that anybody who haven't recognized that would be not even excited or not know what to expect. Some people were just straight up scared, and it's just like, well, maybe you should be if you feel like that, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, when he recognized when people was just like, you know, he's not gonna, you know, God rest his soul.
Yeah.
That has to be challenging to go to different places and meet different types of people and be in different types of environments. That has to be a lot, you know. Like for me, like just being from New York, and I go to certain parts of New York, I gotta be like, what's going on, you know? So for you to be going so many different places and meeting so many different people and just be able to still, you know, compose yourself and be able to, you know, get your questions off and feel comfortable and get them to feel comfortable and getting all that done is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Very
Thank you for
amazing.
saying that. And you know, it kind of goes back to when I was saying I grew up moving all the time, because I think that helped me, you know, to
You're
go
comfortable
from,
with anybody,
to
around
one-
anybody.
Yeah,
You
really.
can talk to anybody.
From a very young age.
Yeah.
Really.
That's a big deal.
So I really appreciate your saying that, because it helped. It's a reminder that, oh wow, I guess I do have some skill sets.
Well, you were nominated for 2 Emmys. How did that feel?
Pretty incredible. And
Yeah.
those two, one was Bob Marley, which was truly one of the most extraordinary experience I had. That and Rough Riders, honestly, are two, people often say, which of all the different stories you've told, which ones really resonate? And to be honest, it was the Bob Marley behind the music and Rough Riders and my two that I really love. And Undercover Boss, I was nominated for that. That was a big team effort.
That's a great show. Like, I love how that show ends.
Oh.
And it's always the boss, like, coming back and giving back to the people that he had spoken to, or he or she had spoken to, and realize how much they really, like, you know, enjoyed their job and gave, you know, sacrificed a lot for themselves to be at this job every day. And to see those you know, those employers give back to them and, like, get them a car, get them a house, you know, just that is
cried.
moving. I every time I watch, I'm like, oh my God, it's so sweet. You know?
All the producers, we all cried in those moments. They were so moving.
Mhm.
And but I wanted to do that show, work on that show, because I'm fascinated by great leaders.
Yeah,
What is it? What does it take to be a great boss?
yeah.
Not everybody is, and what are the qualities? And so I was lucky. I got to work with a lot of CEOs who they weren't used to having someone like me say, okay, I have to meet you at 5 a.m. because we have to put your disguise on, and
That's
I'd come
right,
in
yeah.
and put the mustache on and their wig on, and they're like, Erica, I haven't been used to being told what to do.
I want to ask a question about an episode.
Yeah.
I believe it was, I think it was Models or Dix or something like that, with the lady, and you know, the boss always comes in as a new hire or something like that. So she came as a new hire, and she did an amazing job, like explaining everything down to the T. You get what I'm saying? Explaining the rule book, everything. And he was just amazed. And then, you know, they started sharing story. He gave his, you know, his fake story, and then she gave his real story. And talked about how, like, she was, like, homeless at a point, and had her kids in the car. And he was so overwhelmed about how professional she still carried herself with all that going on. I believe he gave her a raise or something like that after that.
Oh, yeah, I didn't work on that one. I remember that episode, but yeah.
Yeah, that episode, that's what made me really watch the show. Like, yeah, when I watch shows like that, it takes one good episode. If I see a clip of something, I'll be like, oh, nah, this show seems like it's dope. Like,
it grew on you,
it grew on me. You know what I'm saying? It takes time.
And that, we were careful on that. The person who created that show, Stephen Lampert, he was kind of genius, but the bosses, we never told them much about who they were going to meet, the employees, because we wanted them to discover it themselves.
Yeah.
So it was really real. So they really discovered, you know, they didn't know anything about it, and so they would discover it in real time, and you could see how moved they were, because some of the stories were just, but that they would look, that show looked so hard to find those great employees who had such inspiring stories of overcoming adversity.
It was some bad ones too.
It
was a guy. It was a guy inside like some type of like Home Depot type store, you know, hardware store. And he was like giving him the tour. He was like, "Yeah, you don't even gotta put this back." It just threw it to the side.
Oh no!
I'm looking like, oh, all right. But you know, me watching the show, I'm like, bro, that's your ball.
But you don't know that.
I had to talk to myself like, bro, that's your ball. It's like, you just, do this. And he's like, oh, okay, you know, all right, is your boss okay with this? He was like, he don't never come in. I don't know, that show was really good. I did enjoy that show.
So I do got a two-part question.
Yeah.
You got time, right?
We have plenty of
Okay.
time.
So, do you necessarily aim to do specific things, or do it come to you?
That's a really good
That's a
question.
really good question.
That
That was on my list.
And
That is a really good
is
question.
there anybody in the future that you